Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Many things happening, obviously, that we're doing here at Freedom Watch and just in the world in general. We're going to have a very special guest on later in this show, Ken Timmerman, an expert on Iran, a friend of mine. And let me start with Iran, is that we see what's going on with the Middle East right now, the Houthis shutting down the Red Sea, shutting down the Persian Gulf, Iran hijacking an American oil tanker and forcing it back to Iran. We are on the verge of a larger war there. But the reason we're on the verge of that larger war is because our brain dead criminal president, Joe Biden, has been very, very weak. And they see this. So you talk about the Houthis. Who are the Houthis, so to speak? They're just, two-bit agents of the Iranian regime. And I've been saying it over and over again. It's time that we take out that Iranian regime. Now I'm listening to Senator Lindsey Graham. Oh, let's bomb some oil depots or whatever in Iran. That's not enough. They've got nuclear weapons. You bomb the nuclear sites, you take out the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, you take out the supreme leader. And then you go to Qatar and you have the Israelis do it. You take out the leaders of Hamas. We have to do this surgically. If you have cancer, you don't mess around. You go in there, you take it all out. You cauterize it, you remove it. And now is the time to do it because Iran presumably does not have nuclear weapons. I think they may have one or two, but we can handle that. And it's a wider war. Already you're seeing gas prices go up and other prices go up, and notwithstanding the geopolitical considerations of shutting down the traffic in these key areas of the world where ships now have to go around Cape Horn in Africa to get to their destination. This is harming world trade. So this is something I want to discuss with Ken when he comes on. We have worked together in the past. I have brought lawsuits against the supreme leader, against Iran, against the Revolutionary Guard for clients that I had who were killed at Avon prison. One of them, Akbar Mohammadi, who was the first student leader in modern history to call for regime change. He was imprisoned. He was tortured, and his brother Manager. We had a case a number of years ago, and Ken testified along with the CIA director, former CIA director in that case. It's a long story, and we'll deal with it in another show. But this is what we're dealing with here. We're dealing here with a threat to the United States. The Iranians are very, very sophisticated, but God forbid they ever get a nuclear weapon, and now is the time to take care of it. Now, let's also talk about Donald Trump and his experience in New York this week. The judge obviously didn't want him to speak. This is his fraud trial. He got up there, he said a few words anyway. This is exemplary, and this is why it's important. It's not just Trump. Whether in the end he is fined $400 million plus and shut down to do business in New York, that's the least of it. That's the least of the questions that are at issue there. This tells you something about our legal system today. And there are many other examples of it. The travesty of a mockery of a sham, of two travesties of a mockery of the sham, in the words of Woody Allen, as I always say. There is no justice anymore in the courts in a political context. There's no justice with bar associations in DC or New York that are trying to eliminate conservative lawyers from the practice of law, including yours truly. I've been fighting them for years. They won't succeed, but they're going after everybody, Trump and everyone else, and the legal system is being turned on its head, and it's perverted because primarily anybody who supported Donald Trump or thinks even kindly of him, who's a conservative activist, is going to be targeted. But it also tells you about the legal system. This judge thinks he can get away with whatever he wants to do. And even before this trial began, he issued a judgment that Trump and his sons had committed fraud, as well as the Trump organization. Didn't even give him a trial. And then you go over and you see what's happening in the District of Columbia with regard to J6 and these judges, whether they're Democrat or Republican appointees, whether they were appointed by Clinton or Obama, or George W. Bush, or now Biden, and of course Trump, they're all the same. They're establishment judges, and they want to crush anyone who would ever challenge the establishment. So even the peaceful protesters, and we represent several of them. I also have a class action in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Florida that's going on right now as we speak over illegal surveillance, which could wind up throwing out all the prosecutions and all the convictions if we're successful, the government has been forced to admit that they were illegally surveilling January 6th protesters, gathering evidence to use against them. And now we find out that the Justice Department isn't even stopping with those who were at the Capitol that fateful day. Anyone who communicated with anyone who was at the Capitol now is being hunted down, subject to investigation and potential indictment. Now, why is that? Because we're going into an election season. And of course, the Democrats and the Biden regime don't want anyone to rise up. They want to keep people down. They want to keep criticism to an absolute minimum. They don't want anyone like a Larry Klayman or anyone else to be able to challenge them. And consequently, this is a reign of terror that is being foisted on the American people to shut us up in a virtual dictatorship. And then, of course, you have the brain-dead criminal president, Joe Biden, and his druggy criminal son and his criminal brother, who are being exposed as the Biden crime family and the complete criminals they are. Perhaps the biggest criminals in the history of this country in terms of anyone who occupied the Oval Office. Biden gives a speech this week telling everyone that Trump is evil. He's the equivalent of Adolf Hitler. People that were January 6th are like the Nazis. This is his only argument to try to retain the presidency. And of course, why does he want to retain the presidency? Primarily because that way he controls the Justice Department. And in that way, he assures that he won't be prosecuted, that his son Hunter will be let off the hook for his tax evasion and everything else with a slap on the wrist, and his brother and the rest of his family will go free, including his lovely wife, Jill, who, of course, is a co-conspirator in all of this, and she's benefited from the tens, if not hundreds of $millions that have been laundered through to the Biden crime family from communist China, Russia, Ukraine, and elsewhere. So all of this is related. And you've got a situation here in this country where the American people are lied to on a continual basis. And who is one of the biggest liars in American history? Dr. Fauci, or as we would call him, Dr. Mengele. And this week he was in the news. He was forced to admit that, in fact, the social distancing that occurred and all the masks and quarantining during the period of the pandemic, which is still going on, by the way, that he made that all up. There was no scientific evidence to do that. Harmed kids in terms of their education, harmed business, harmed everyone, and yet didn't prevent COVID-19. He also pushed vaccines, which were dangerous. We know they're dangerous now. Anybody that takes them is living in a different world. And Fauci's still out in the loose. Now, what have we done at Freedom Watch? And this is why I need your help, because we have started our own system of justice, because we don't have justice with our alleged government, our corrupt government. We indicted Biden for bribery from communist Ukraine and Russia. We tried him. We convicted him. We got a sentence of 20 years. We tried Fauci the same way. We got a sentence of life. These sentences need to be carried out, and we are petitioning law enforcement all around the country, sheriffs and police chiefs, because the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, wouldn't send over the Capitol Police to arrest them. We petitioned him to do it. Tells you something about Mike Johnson. Presents a nice image, nice guy, but he's no different than Kevin McCarthy and the rest of the clowns on Capitol Hill. Now, talk about the clowns on Capitol Hill. We saw a publicity stunt earlier in this week by Hunter Biden. One of the committees run by James Comer was going to hold Hunter Biden in contempt for not showing up for his deposition behind closed doors. That was going to be a vote out of the committee. It ultimately did get voted out of the committee. But Hunter Biden's lawyer, Abby Lowell, who I call Abby Normal, shows up with Hunter Biden and offers to testify. Of course, Hunter Biden didn't want to testify. He'd have to take the Fifth Amendment. He's got 2 criminal charges against him. But they make a monkey out of the Republicans. And they get there and they say, okay, we're willing to testify. We're willing to do whatever you want. And they knew that the Republicans wouldn't take them up on the offer. In fact, the only Republican congressman that had any guts was Nancy Mace. There was some humor to it. Suggested that Hunter Biden be arrested on the spot. Not a bad idea, but that was not going to happen. The Republicans are for show. They're not for dough. So you've got this evil force on the left with Biden, the brain dead criminal, rubber stamping what the socialists, the communists, and the atheists and other radical ideologies want. And you got a Republican Party that does things for show, promising that they're going to impeach Biden, promising they're going to impeach the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas. They have no intention. It's all basically political, and it's meant to weaken Biden going into the election in 2024. And lo and behold, if the Republicans win, what are you going to get? You're going to get the same thing you got last time. They'll do nothing. And even if Trump wins, I have always been supportive of Trump in my personal capacity. What are you going to get there? He's not even in charge. The deep state will be in charge. They've tried to destroy him. The president is simply a figurehead. So it is time for we, the American people, to rise up and do it for ourselves. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. Contribute to our cause with tax-deductible contributions. We are your real Justice Department. You have no Justice Department. We need to return the rule of law to this country, and everyone needs to be held to account. And I'll be back in just a little bit with Ken Timmerman. Listen carefully to what he has to say about Iran, because it's just the tip of the iceberg in the way our international scene is going to explode. We're already in World War III. And God forbid, we don't take strong action now, we're going to be in a nuclear holocaust. Stay tuned. In the meantime, go to freedomwatchusa.org and contribute to our cause with tax-deductible contributions and sign up for our Justice League. I'll be right back. I'm very happy and proud to have my friend and colleague and comrade in arms, Ken Timmerman, on the show. He is an expert on Iran. He's an expert, in international matters in particular. He has a story. Maybe you could tell a little bit about it in this first episode, how you were actually a hostage at one point in the Middle East. So you've got that experience too. But I want to get Ken's take on what's going on with Iran right now and the Houthis. Who are the Houthis, as I say? And Ken can give you a really clear perspective on the risk that Iran poses to the United States. Of course, we've been focusing only on the periphery with the so-called surrogates of Iran. So anyway, I want to turn it over to Ken. Tell us a little bit about how you were a hostage, and then we'll get into how we deal with Iran, in your opinion.
Well, thanks for having me on, Larry. It's a pleasure to see your face and to be here with you. I've been reporting on and from the Middle East as a war correspondent and investigative reporter for nearly 40 years. Well, 40 years. I was taken hostage in '82 in the Israeli war against the PLO, one of the early Israeli wars against Fatah and the PLO in Lebanon, and I was captured by the Fatah. I tell that in my book, and the rest is history. Tales of hostages, arms dealers, dirty tricks, and spies. And you can find out more about that at my website, kentimmerman.com. But I keep going back. I was in Israel just about 6 weeks ago. And after the Hamas massacres in those southern communities along the Gaza border. And I must say, the stories that you hear from the former hostages are just heartbreaking. Especially the stories that we heard from medical personnel who were examining children, because the children obviously are not going to talk to the media. They shouldn't be talking to the media, but they talk to the doctors. And these children, 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, who were beaten by crowds when they were brought back to Gaza, kept in solitary confinement in rooms where everybody was hostile to them, where armed men were telling these 10-year-olds, 11 years old, 12-year-olds, don't speak, don't speak, don't speak, and threatening to beat them all the time. They were still speaking in whispers after they'd been back in Israel for 2 weeks. That's how traumatic the experience was. So you hear these stories, Larry, and it just, it breaks your heart on the one hand. And on the other hand, you understand the resolve of all these families in Israel who have loved ones, sons and daughters, in most cases, husbands and wives at the front who are fighting. They are fighting a righteous cause.
Well, it is a real tragedy, obviously. You were able to interview them, or were you writing some stories about it?
I could not talk to the children. Nobody talks to them, but you talk to the doctors. So you talk to the doctors who would examine the children, and it just breaks your heart.
Well, one of the things I said in the intro, Ken, and I want to get your thoughts on it. And as I said to our listeners at the beginning, we were engaged in the case. You were a material witness, along with CIA Director Jim Woolsey at the time, with regard to a family called the Mohammadi family, Akbar
Right.
Mohammadi was the first student leader in modern Iranian history to call for regime change, and for that he was tortured and killed in Ivan prison. But quite apart from that, what really upsets me and makes me feel very frustrated is that we talk about fighting Iran by putting on economic sanctions or making them a pariah. Now, I've been saying over and over again, and I think because I haven't talked to you, I'm the only one that's been saying it, is that if we don't take out the nuclear facilities now, if we don't take out the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the leadership, we're never going to have an opportunity to do it again. Because in theory, they don't have atomic weapons right now. Of course, I think they may have a couple. But what do you think about that? Because I think the time is ripe to take them out. Now we've got the excuse, the pretext, because they seized an American oil tanker earlier in the week on top of everything else that's been going on with, their surrogates in various countries. But give me your thoughts on that.
Well, Larry, I've worked with Iranian freedom fighters for many, many years. As you know, I had for many years I had a foundation called the Foundation for Democracy in Iran, Iran.org on the internet. It's still there, so I'm very close to the people who are fighting against the regime in Iran. And one thing that they constantly tell me is that they do not want U.S. military intervention unless it is so thoroughly overwhelming that it topples the regime. And I don't think a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities would topple the regime. I don't think it would do the trick. I think, and besides which, this administration does not have the intestinal fortitude to drop a single 2,000-pound bomb on it. So it's a moot question. But in a future administration, I would certainly be counseling, helping the Iranian people to overthrow the regime, to give the freedom fighters in Iran what they need in terms of whether
Ken,
it's.
we'll be right back with the next segment. Hang in there. We'll
Okay.
pick up at the end of the break. Right back
Okay.
with Ken Timmerman, with Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. I'm back with Ken Timmerman. We were talking about how the Iranian people want us to basically remove the regime, not pinpricks, in military facilities, etc. We had an opportunity many years ago. You and I were working together, in effect, during the Obama administration, when there was that opportunity to potentially overthrow the regime. Now it's many years later, and that regime is now very powerful. So how would you go about overthrowing them if given the current state of affairs and the strength of the Iranian regime?
Well, in 2009, which you're referring to, where there were 3 million people in the streets of Tehran, and they were, chanting, "Obama, are you with us?" And Obama basically said back to them, "No, I'm not. I'm with the regime." For the past 2 years, since 2021, you've had uprisings all across Iran, popular protests, the hijab protests, women life movement of Iranian women, and also ethnic minorities, extremely important ethnic minority people. People think that Iran is Persia. Persia is part of today's Iran, but that's only half of it. Half of the Iranian people even speak Persian. They speak Kurdish. They speak various dialects, Arabic, and other languages. So I think we need to have a pretty broad-based movement that reaches out to those leaders on the ground all across Iran, from all different segments of the population. It can be done publicly through public diplomacy. I think there are also things that should be done covertly. Those, obviously, I'm not going to talk about. But there's a lot that we can do through public diplomacy, through broadcasting, through internet freedom, through, for example, ensuring that they have access to the internet through these portable Wi-Fi networks that you can set up in the mountains of Kurdistan and elsewhere. There's lots of things that we can do that we have not thought of doing. But I would like to make the mullahs' lives very uncomfortable, and I would like to enhance the ability of the Iranian people to make their lives very uncomfortable.
What makes you think that they have the firepower to take out the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which protects the supreme leader and the other animals over there?
Well, you're not going to take them. You're not going to take them out militarily, and that's something that is very important for people to understand. Civil disobedience is a weapon of political warfare. It is not being used as a weapon of political warfare by the United States or by our allies. But I think there's lots of things that we can do by helping the Iranians to organize a kind of political jiu-jitsu against the regime. The people of Iran will not have more weapons than the Revolutionary Guards. It would be futile to oppose them with weapons. They will get creamed, they'll get destroyed. Better is to infiltrate, to undermine, to create a popular movement that delegitimizes them. And I think that's the important thing. Right now, they are the legitimate power in Iran. That's the way they portray themselves. That's the way they're seen. We have to find ways through political action to delegitimize them.
If you were to try to take them out militarily, how would you do it?
Well, that's a completely different story. And, you know, I'm not a military person. I'm a war correspondent. I've been on the ground. I've been shot at in a number of places. But, you know, I'm not a military strategist. But I think there are things that we can do. There are things that the Iranians have told me we can do. But it would be a very, very large operation. And it'd be the kind of thing I don't see any U.S. administration doing anytime soon.
Do you think that Lindsey Graham's idea to bomb the oil wells would accomplish anything?
I think that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. And as much as I like Lindsey Graham, you hit the oil wells in Iran, and what you've done is turn the Iranian people against us. And that's the last thing that we want to do. We want to keep them on our side. We want to show them that we are on their side against the regime. So that is not a smart thing to do. You can do targeted strikes like President Trump did against Qasem Soleimani. That was actually up inside Iran. The thugs who are running the Revolutionary Guards, who are running, they are possible Iran itself. So that kind of operation you can carry out. But going after infrastructure would be a very bad idea, in my opinion.
Do we have the capability of infiltrating and assassinating the supreme leader and people around him?
Well, look, I'm not in the intelligence community. I can't tell you, but we did it with Qasem Soleimani, and that was a pretty impressive operation. He had just arrived from, I believe, Syria on an aircraft at Baghdad International Airport with another militia leader, got into a car in a small convoy at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and bang, we hit him with a Predator drone strike. That was very good intelligence. So if you have the intelligence to do that kind of thing, you ought to have the intelligence to go about assassinating just about anybody. Now, I remind you, assassination is, of course, illegal under U.S. law, and it requires a presidential finding. And I can't remember the last time there was a presidential finding to assassinate the leader of another country.
Unless it's our leader, you know.
Yes, unless it's our leader.
That's Harvey Oswald or whoever.
And there is political assassination. Well, right, and political assassinations with President Trump.
What do you think the effect would be in Iran if we did assassinate the supreme leader? Would that freeze them?
Well, Larry, I think, again, the regime itself has a monopoly on all the forces of repression, on all the weapons. They have a monopoly on the police and the IRGC. And I think they would clamp down very, very quickly, and there would just be another supreme leader. I don't think that's a solution. I would not advocate that as a policy at this point. I think there are, again, I favor a political jiu-jitsu. I favor nonviolent political activity. I favor delegitimizing the regime in the eyes of the people and in the eyes of the regime leaders themselves. If you have a defection among Revolutionary Guards officers against the hierarchy because they're corrupt, because they're putting money in their pockets, because they are not helping the junior officers and the people on the ground, I think that goes a long, long way to getting rid of the regime. You delegitimize them.
Let's talk about the Hamas leaders that are living high on the Hague in Qatar.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Israelis
why is that allowed to continue? Why aren't the Israelis taking them out?
Don't bet that the Israelis won't take them out. They have said they will, and they've said that all of the Hamas leaders who have taken part in the October 7th massacres, they will pay a price. And I sat and listened to Mark Regev just today say exactly that again. They will pay a price. So you know, the Israelis are patient when it comes to things like this. Remember, they waited several years after the 1972 massacre at the Munich Olympics before they got most of the people there. And then, of course, there was a mistake and they had to stop. But I believe that they will go after them wherever they can find them and wherever they can mount a credible operation.
What do you think about whether or not there should be some kind of peace between Hamas and Israel? It looks to me like what Israel's doing now is they're moving troops to the northern border with Lebanon, and they're basically just doing a holding action in southern Gaza. Is that a prelude to possibly some kind of an agreement where Hamas will be relegated to lesser importance? I don't see, frankly, how the Israelis, the way they're going about it, will ever eliminate all of Hamas.
It's going to be difficult. I think they realize how difficult it's going to be. They have destroyed the Hamas military infrastructure in the north. They are working on that in central Gaza. They're working on that in Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is a very difficult piece because it's full of so many civilians. And so they have to try to go after these tunnels and underground workshops in the midst of a civilian population. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. But I think what the Israelis want to do is to ultimately to stabilize the situation. They want to prevent Hamas from being able to launch rockets against Israeli populations. They want to be able to prevent Hamas from launching a cross-border attack such as they did on October 7th. And slowly they're getting to that goal. But, you know, it looks like they're moving troops away and you know, moving up to the northern border. But they're in this for the long haul. You know, their defense minister and the chief of staff have both said the fighting in Gaza will continue throughout 2024, all year long. So they're not leaving. They're just minimizing. They're working with a smaller footprint and with more targeted attacks.
Based on what you know, because you are an expert in that area, Ken, if a war breaks out with Hezbollah, you know, reportedly has over 100,000 rockets
right.
they can use. How could Israel expect to win that war under those circumstances? Wouldn't Hezbollah totally decimate Israel at that point?
No, and I'll tell you why I say that. I think the Iranians telegraphed their intentions on October 7th when they did not order Hezbollah to join the fighting. If the Iranians had really wanted to really go after Israel and wreak even more destruction than they did on October 7th, they would have had all three fronts: Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, and their proxies in Syria to the east. All three fronts against Israel. They didn't do that. They have not ordered Hezbollah, to launch a full-scale war against Israel. They've launched 1,700 rockets. That's significant, but it's not a full-scale attack. And I happen to think that Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, is a bit worried about what other Lebanese politicians and what Lebanese public opinion thinks about him. He destroyed the country in 2006. I was there on the ground during that war, reporting from the Israeli side and into southern Lebanon. Nasrallah destroyed Lebanese infrastructure. They don't want to see that happen again. And I think that's actually putting pressure on him.
Now, Israel has reportedly, I use the word reportedly, over 100 atomic weapons. And I suspect that there is a range of them, you know, large ones, small ones, neutron bombs, etc., tactical. At what point should Israel ever consider using them? If you have something at some point, you know, you may actually have to use them. At what point would that arrive?
Well, I think Israeli doctrine has for decades been, as former Prime Minister Shimon Peres said, Israel will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the region, but they won't be the last either. So those weapons are there as the ultimate guarantor of Israel's survival, should, God forbid, something happen with a country like Iran, a nation like the Islamic State of Iran, that's what I call them, should they actually use nuclear weapons against Israel. And you know, we don't know what the Ayatollah thinks. That's the problem, Larry. Nobody knows what's going on inside his brain. And that's the hardest thing to gauge. So that's why everybody looks at their capabilities. They look now with increasing alarm at Iran's stockpiling of 60% uranium. And 60% uranium is almost weapons grade. I mean, it's very, very close. the IAEA has estimated that they can have 5 nuclear weapons within a month. There are independent experts who've said they can have 5 within 12 weeks. Should they push the final bit of enrichment? So the Iranians are really on a razor's edge between being a non-nuclear state and a nuclear weapons state. I don't think the Israelis will allow them to go that final, couple of inches, whatever it is, the turns of a screw. But they don't need to use nuclear weapons to do that.
What could they use to do that? We've got about 2 minutes left, and then I want to let you tell people where they can reach you and support you. Got 1 minute left. Well, we'll go into the other last segment too. So go ahead, Ken.
Well, look, I think the Israelis have shown over the past couple of years that they have many other non-kinetic ways of slowing down the Iranian nuclear weapons program, whether it's by attacking the centrifuges with a computer virus, cyber attack, or whether it's killing nuclear scientists, whether it's by stealing the nuclear archive and then making it public. An amazing intelligence coup in play is getting very, very close now to a nuclear-ready Iran, and I think that's got the Israelis looking at other options, more kinetic options.
Well, and that's my point. We'll talk about it at the other end of the break. I got about 30 seconds here, and we'll come back and deal with this because it's a very important issue, and it gets back to the initial point that I made. We'll be right back with Ken Timmerman. Stay tuned. Now, fellow patriots, the verdict. Those who believe in the vision and creation of our founding fathers, fellow patriots. We're back with Ken Timmerman. Well, this gets us full circle, because if the Iranians are just weeks away or a month away from putting together 5 atomic bombs, will cyber warfare stop that? And if they do get those bombs, which they apparently can get very, very quickly, the ramifications in terms of what's going on with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with the Islamic Jihad, with the Houthis, you name it, Syria, everything becomes much more acute and pronounced. So my point is that if you're going to do it, if you're going to take out those facilities, and Israel has, I believe, probably weapons that can do it. We could have used the Mator Bor, but we never did. We should have, with bin Laden. Tactical nuclear weapons, neutron bombs, whatever. If you're ever going to use something like that, wouldn't now be the time?
Well, Larry, I think there's a great deal of, there are international standards. There are international standards. There are moral standards around the world not to use nuclear weapons. Every nuclear power except for Russia and China has pledged no nuclear first use. And I think the Israelis have said that in the statement by Shimon Peres, where he says we will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons. I really don't see that happening. I get everybody talks about military strikes on Iran. I agree with you that a cyber attack is not going to keep the Iranians if they turn the nuclear screw, if they actually put the highly enriched uranium, make warhead, put it onto a bullet in the Middle East, and I think everybody's estimates are blown off the map.
Well, the problem with that
all bets are off at that point.
The problem with that, Ken, is in today's world, no government will tell us if that happened because they don't want to face the reality. Particularly our government will cover that up because Biden wants the Nobel Peace Prize like Obama got it, and who knows? I think Iran probably has a nice dossier on him, and maybe blackmailing him. There's plenty out there to use. But anyway, I want to thank you for your expertise. You're a good friend, and what you do is extremely valuable, and you're a brave guy. You're courageous. Not many people would subject themselves to that degree of risk going over there. By the way, I was in Israel during 2 wars with Hamas, but I haven't been in it as deep as you've been. But thank you, Ken. Where can people reach you?
The easiest thing is at my website, just my name, kentimmerman.com. And soon you can also find me at the America First Policy Institute. I've just joined the Institute as a senior fellow, where I'll be writing about Israel and Hamas, about the Iranians and other things. So kentimmerman.com or America First policy.com.
Congratulations on that new position. Follow Ken Timmerman. He's one of the top experts in international relations. Thank you, Ken. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. God bless.
I want you to go to freedomwatchusa.org, join our Justice League, contribute with tax-deductible contributions. We are unafraid. We can sit here in a dream world believing that nothing's going to happen, that this will all go away, but it won't. And as Ken Timmerman said, Iran is right on the verge of a nuclear weapon. They can put one together in a matter of days, and they probably already have. And for us to sit there and to play games with Houthis or cuties or whatever the case may be is a waste of time. It's simply provoking. It's poking. It's exacerbating the cancer that's already there. So now is the time to act if you're ever going to act. And I maintain, forget about nuclear norms, international norms. Everybody hates Israel anyway, not me, not you, not our listeners, but the international community. They have to do what needs to be done, and the United States needs to do what needs to be done. We'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, remember, the Father and Son will only help us if we help ourselves, and thank God that we do have that Father and Son behind us, because that may be our salvation, and I know it will be. Thank you for listening to me, and we'll be back next week.